What's up, gangsters? So, yeah, back in the day when I used to finish more kits, I did this thing where I would always do like a two-part sort of kit review, finished project sort of tandem thing. And yeah, I've gotten out of practice at doing that because, like I said, I don't finish as much stuff as fast anymore. But I wanted to do that with this Meng 1/48 scale Hornet that I've been working on. This thing right here. I have talked a lot about the various things that I've seen going on with the kit and that I've been doing with it in my mini minutes of random videos. In fact, some of them have been about nothing but the Hornet. But I thought, well, you know, kind of in the interest of doing a sort of review type thing, that I should collect all of my thoughts about the kit itself in sort of one place. And so, anyway, that's what I'm going to do here. You know, if you're one of those guys who just wants to buy the damn thing, put it together, and put it on the shelf, stop watching now. Because this is going to be a bit of a rambling and, as usual, detailed view of some of the minutia of this kit. If you're one of those guys like me who fusses over every little detail, yeah, then maybe this will be helpful for you. So anyway, without any more lip flapping, let's get into it. Okay, so let's just get right into it and start with the easy stuff, the decals. These decals are pretty nice. They seem to have really good printing and registration, good coloring, just like you'd expect from Cartograph, because yes, they are in fact printed by those good folks. And you get two different sheets. These are your weapons markings, and then these are your aircraft markings. And, you know, again, you can see really high quality stuff, well printed. The one thing, though, that I kind of did object to is that on some of the really small stencil things, it just wasn't, you know, like this one right here, I think is a pretty, where is it at? Pretty good example where it's just sort of a pretend stencil. And there are a few of those, but you know, that's not really a big deal. They still look pretty good. I think overall this is a nice decal sheet. As you can see, I haven't used very many of them. I haven't needed to yet. And I probably am not going to use very many because the markings on my bird are going to be all different. And I, you know, generally choose to paint markings anyway. Stencils and stuff, I'll use what I need to. But I also have decal sheet from Afterburner because of using because of my markings being different. And so I really won't probably end up needing to use a whole lot of these. Where I used them the most was on the weapons. And they really performed pretty well. I applied them all the same way, going directly onto the paint, which of course is almost exclusively MRP. And I used Mr. Mark's setter, which I like. It's kind of an adhesive type decal solvent, and it worked great. I really, you know, feel like that I got good results. One place where you can see some of the kit decals is right here on the seat. So you can see, you know, sort of firsthand. There you go. There's a couple of those little bitty sort of pseudo stencils, you know, but they look good and they seem to be accurate enough. So there you go. So that's it for the decals. Pretty happy about those. I'll leave that there. The other thing that you get that's pretty cool is you get this little thing of masks. I ended up also getting an Edward mask set, so I didn't use the Canopy masks, but I did use some of the wheel masks, and they work fine. No objection there. They seem to be working pretty good. Another thing that you get in the kit is a little bit of photo etch, because there's a couple of places where it's required, but there's really not much need for it if you build it out of the box. One place where you'll use it is right here. This sort of grating there behind the pilot's seat is photo etch, and that looks really good. It was fine. And then you also get, one thing I really do like that you get as well is for the gas tanks and weapons, you get, they use this system of pins and poly caps, which I really like, because for stuff like this, it gives you a really solid mount. And I can pull this off of here so you can kind of see what I mean. You can see that's not the pin, that's a magnet, because I've got all these pylons magnetized. Oh, and there's some of the afterburner decals that I was talking about. Really, really good decals. But you can see the polycap and pin arrangement for the weapons is nice, because it's a really positive engagement that doesn't require any glue, and it's not ever going to get knocked loose. Okay, so as I was saying before the phone rang, this is nice because it's a positive engagement, and it's, you know, really straightforward. The polycaps are embedded inside there, and there are the little pins that poke out, so that works really good. And here, since I happen to have this sprue right here, you can see they've engineered it really well where the pins go in. And so, actually, this is where the polycaps go. Sorry, this is the female side. So that works really good. And the engineering on the other side for the pins is equally nice. So I do like that. And that's really kind of the theme for this kit, is that overall, the engineering, I think, is really solid. The molding is outstanding. I didn't see any flash anywhere to speak of. Actually, not at all. And so I felt like that was really good. Where I kind of, I guess, maybe take a slightly less enthusiastic view of the kit, however, is in terms of fit. And this kit is what I would call kind of an 80% kit, which by that I mean that it's a really good kit, it's a really solid kit. If all you want to have is a cool looking Hornet on your shelf, you want to pull it out of the box, put it together, it goes together pretty, you know, in a pretty straightforward fashion. And if you're not super worried about really precise fit everywhere, then it's not, you know, it's not going to cause you much trouble. But that other 20% is going to cost you a significant amount of time and energy if you are really particular about things. And that's kind of what I'm going to go through now, is show you just kind of some kind of all the places where that is, you know, where that was a thing. So it started for me, and I'm going to set the airframe back here, get it out of the way. Started for me with the landing gear, because I wisely chose to do all of the small parts on this thing first. And they are all done. Got a couple of pylons here and a FLIR camera. Anyway, I started with the landing gear. And the landing gear, the engineering, like I said, is good. I like the, you know, little things like the fact that, you know, you can see here on the axle, it's got a flat spot, so it's got really positive engagement. But it does mean that if you're going to do something with the wheels to make them look more weighted, that you have to pay attention to that. But the fit is really, you know, nice. The wheels go on without any fuss whatsoever. It's a really positive engagement. You can see it's got a little bit of slop in it, but otherwise, you know, stout and strong. And then you look at where the gear subassembly plugs in. You can see that big beefy tab right there is nice. And I can't show you the slot because it's the landing gear bays are masked off right now, but it's a really solid connection. Same thing with the nose gear. Wheels go on, real positively. And the gear itself plugs into a couple of holes for those pins right there. So all that stuff is pretty good. No issue there. But these are made up of multiple pieces, and it really was not much of an issue on the nose gear. But on the main gear, I fussed with these a lot because there's a, let's see if I can remember how it goes. I did a pretty good job of hiding the seams, I guess. Anyway, there's a piece that goes on from the side. Maybe I can show it to you in the instruction book better. And I should say, while I'm flipping through here, let's just take a quick look at this. This is a good instruction book. I like, I like the way it's laid out. They do a good job of giving you all the information you need without things being too crowded. They do, a good job with the color call-outs. This is what you want from an instruction sheet. No worries there. And they do a good job, at least in some cases, of showing you like what something should look like after it's assembled. That's always nice. They don't tell you why you might choose one option over another in some cases. And I'll get to that one here in a minute. But the thing, let's see, where is the landing gear stuff. Okay. So this is the nose gear, and you can see how that breaks down. No issue with any of that. There's no seams that need to be dealt with. But on the main gear, I think that's on the previous page. Nope. Well, there's one of the places the photo etch goes, is inside the exhaust nozzles. We'll come back to those nozzles. That's one of the less satisfactory parts of the kit. All right, so, okay, here we go. This is the main gear. So you can see right here in step 18 where you've got this split right here. You've got that part number C15 mates with part number C23. And because you're cutting several cylinders in half, you've got some seams. And again, if you're not going to be super picky, if you don't really care about it because it's on the bottom of the airplane and not going to be seen that often, no big deal. You probably don't even need to worry about it. I could not live with it, and I really spent a lot of time fussing with those seams to make sure that they wouldn't show, because I knew that I was going to put a pretty heavy wash on these things to make them look pretty dirty. And, a seam is a perfect place for a wash to collect and to let everybody know, hey, here's a joint that I didn't fill properly. And I just couldn't live with that. So I did. I fussed with these landing gear a lot, but I'm happy with the way they turned out. You can see the kit decals look pretty good. They go on nicely. So that's all good. Let's see. The other thing with the landing gear, though, is really kind of more of just a molding limitation. Because, as you can imagine, with these wheels being molded left and right, they can't put a groove in them, or grooves, plural. And so they are only very faintly there at best. And that meant that I was, of course, going to do the stupid thing and try to carve some grooves, which I did. Kind of, didn't do terrible, didn't do great. But this, that's a pretty good reason always for going with aftermarket resin tires. I just really wanted to use as much of the kit stuff as I could, and it came out okay. I ended up with 2 grooves in this tire and 3 grooves in this tire. It could happen. Hey, whatever. It's my story. I'm sticking to it. So that's an issue with the. It's really just a molding issue, just a molding limitation. That's not, something that I can really say is a flaw. The pilot figure, he's not great. He's not the detail is not super good, not super crisp. But what are you gonna ask for? It's a 1/48 scale pilot. not, it's just not going to be great. That's just the way it is. Here you can see landing gear doors. They're all pretty good, nice positive engagement, and they give you a pretty good separation so that you can go back and paint the red outlines. There's several different ways to do that. Some people do it by hand. I chose to mask and spray and then do a bunch of touch-ups and then do a heavy wash to hide the problems. But yeah, those, I think the landing gear doors are all pretty good and pretty solidly engineered the way that they go on. Another thing though that kind of fits in the sort of lack of detail department is the exhaust nozzles, and I just got to those a couple of days ago and had not really looked at them that closely before, so I was a little bit bummed out. You can see the detail on them is just extremely soft, extremely sort of just vague. And that's a good reason right there that you might want to go to an aftermarket nozzle. You can see on the inside they're kind of anyway. But here's the thing I was mentioning a minute ago about the instruction sheet not telling you why you would use one part over the other. So there's two different nozzles, and I didn't recognize this until I had painted one of each. You can see this one has straight feathers, and the other one has feathers with a little notch in the end of it. And you'll see in the instructions that they will tell you that you can use either one. If I can find it. They'll tell you with that little arrow thing that you can use either one, but they don't say why. So, of course, I had to go ask some questions, do a little bit of research, and the fact is that the style with the notches in it is the later version. However, I do have photos, and this is pretty cool. I do have photos that show Hornets with one of each on them. And so I could use these. This is not incorrect. You'll see it. You'll even see some nozzles that have a mixture of different style feathers on the same nozzle. So that would be pretty cool. I haven't decided what I'm going to do with those yet. I don't think I want to use them. I just haven't decided if I'm going to do some 3D design work in Fusion 360 and make my own and 3D print them, or if I'm going to just punt and go buy some. I haven't really had time to look and see what's available out there yet, but it is what it is. The next thing that I want to talk about is the weapons, since I'm kind of looking at the gas tank and pylons here. There's really nothing wrong with any of the weapons, but they are very 2005-ish or before, 2010-ish or before. Hold on a second here. These are what you get with the kit. You get these GBU 24s and GBU 16s, which are going out of style and have been for a bit. And what I'm doing here with this thing is I am depicting it as if it is 10 years from now. Like, after seeing a lot of action, beat up filthy bird flying from an aircraft carrier that is not even going to be in service until 2028. So, I don't want to use these weapons, so I ended up using aftermarket stuff from Edward, as well as designing some of my own in Fusion 360 and 3D printing them, and you'll see those in the second part of this two-part series. But anyway, those they give you several different missile options. I went with the AIM-9X because it's the, kind of the newer thing. But, otherwise, the weapons things are all pretty good. Now, one thing that I did not like about the weapons, however, was this right here. You'll see the, you know that in an AIM-9 or an AIM-9X, that it's got a seeker head that's got a clear lens in it. And this whole piece right here, this SMK3 and SMK5 on that one, the whole thing is clear. But it's actually that line, you can see the line closest to the tip, that's the demarcation between the body of the missile and the clear seeker head. And yeah, I just, painting that was a challenge. What I ended up doing was finding a piece of tubing, the right size, brass tubing, and rigging up a system to hold it in place over the tip of the clear part while I sprayed the other part of it to match this portion of the missile. And then I glued it on. And it turned out okay. You'll see it again in the second part, but it just was kind of an annoying thing where, again, they kind of took the easy way out on the engineering. Instead of making a smaller clear part that fit the end of this thing, or I don't know, just anyway, there's a couple of different things that they could have done that were not nearly as much of a hassle for the model maker. So I didn't care for that too much, but hey, got past it. Kind of going back to the instruction book, and I know I'm jumping all around here, but again, you can kind of get an idea of how it looks. It's pretty good. The sprue map, always one of my favorite things. They do a good job with that. They give you a page that shows how to use these masks. That's nice. And then you get a complete set of color plates, which are pretty good. And no issue with any of that stuff. This decal set even includes one for an aircraft that may or may not be Top Gun material. Yeah, pilot unknown. In other words, not Pete Maverick Mitchell. But yeah, we all know the deal, right? Anyway, so that's kind of cool. You can do that if that's your thing. Then you get another illustration that, gives you all the locations of stencils on the weapons, which was really helpful. Anyway, so that's the instruction sheet. That's the stuff you get in the kit aside from, the major airframe parts. And kind of a couple of issues with some of the small parts. Now, let's talk about the whole airframe itself. And I need to grab something to set this on so that I don't have to handle it this whole time. But this is where the majority of my time has been spent, kind of dealing with issues. So, and hopefully I can remember all of them. So I'll start with the cockpit. The cockpit all goes together pretty well, but the detail was pretty, simplistic. And so as you can see, I chose, maybe you can see, I don't know if you'll be able to see or not, probably not. Let me see if I can move the camera. I chose to go aftermarket on the cockpit by using Edward pre-painted photo etch, and that was not my favorite thing. It was the first time I'd ever done that, and probably will be the last time. Let me see if I can get some light in there. I don't know that you're going to be able to see this very well between the focus and the light. It's not terrible, but it was a lot of work, and the bottom line is that those photo etch pieces just don't really fit all that great in several places, and it really was a giant hassle. And while it looks good enough, certainly adds some detail, especially with the canopy closed as I'm going to have it on this. I just don't know that I'd do that again. It was not a pleasant experience, and I didn't feel like the result was great enough to really justify the hassle. So anyway, that's that. And since we're right there, there's a couple of fit issues to talk about here. And these are important ones. All right, hopefully I can get this thing focused. All right, so if you look right here, okay, the windscreen part really fit beautifully everywhere except the back part of the thing, okay? So this distance from here to here was about a 0.5 millimeter too small on that part. So I mean, and it was obvious. It fit really good. You can see up here on the front, you know, all of that really pretty good, no issue there. But back there at the back definitely was a problem, and I don't think that's going to focus. So what I ended up having to do was I glued the thing down completely on the left-hand side, left this side over here loose, and then just made a little wedge with a toothpick and jammed it in there between the instrument panel and the inside of the windscreen to push that edge over enough to where it lined up out here, and then I glued it in place, left it overnight, and it worked fine. Now, some people were like, oh, dude, you're going to get stress fractures in your clear part by putting force on it. And yeah, that's a thing. And if I'd had to put a lot of force on it, I would have been worried about that. But it really didn't take much. It moved over easily, and you know, as far as I know, there's no issues there. So I think I'll be okay on that. But the worst issue was with the canopy, and I'm going to have to see if I can reach over here in the windowsill and grab it. So hold on. Okay, the reason that it was over in the windowsill is because I've had it sitting there for the last 4 or 5 days baking in the morning sun. Now, why would I want to do that? Well, because it also was quite a bit too narrow, almost a full millimeter. And so, and again, only right there at the joint between the two clear pieces. So I made that spreader bar, and I'm hoping that the warmth of the sun and some time will cause the canopy to relax into a new, wider shape. We can see right now, let's just test it out. I'll just pop this out. Comes right out, and again, not much force involved, and we'll see what the thing looks like when it's in place. Again, as you can see, it fits beautifully at the back. That's all good. And then let's see how it's doing on width up front. You can see that's not too terrible right there on the left-hand side. Whoops. Okay, so you can see that it's not horrible there on the left-hand side, but it's not right. It's too narrow. You can see hopefully where there's a little bit of an issue right there. And so I may have to heat it more aggressively before I can really get it to be right, because as you can see, it's good on this side. In fact, it's pretty perfect right there. So my morning sun trick is working, because it was about a millimeter too narrow before, but you know, probably just not going to be enough. I may have to put a little bit more width in there and put a little more heat on it with a hairdryer maybe. I think that'll solve the problem. So the principle works. It's just needs a little bit more. Now the other place though that I'm going to have to deal with, and this should be pretty straightforward, but it's still annoying, is, okay, when you get the thing all the way seated down there, you can see that there is a significant and noticeable gap between the two pieces. And I don't know how I'm going to deal with that yet. I'm going to work on it by just removing a little bit of material down here and see if I can get it to just shut a little bit tighter. But again, you can see fits really nice at the back, not so good right there. And that's just, that's just annoying. And somebody made the comment, well, these things weren't really designed to be modeled with the canopy shut. Well, look, I call bullshit on that. It should fit properly regardless of how you choose to position it. So I'm not buying into that. And I'm not, I'm not really trying to harsh on Meng for this one too bad. I think this, I don't think that this is a matter of bad engineering. I think this is a part that is just prone to warping a little bit right there at the front. And, they either could not or chose not to control that. And this slips through quality control. So, yeah, I'm not happy about that. You shouldn't have to be fucking with clear parts when you're clear down at the end of a build, but it is what it is. This one at least is going to be fixable in a fairly straightforward fashion. All right, so since we're right there around the cockpit, let's talk about the nose, because this is a part that really kind of gives people the most difficulty. So the entire nose section goes on separately, and the simplest way to explain that is to just show you in the instruction book. So you can see that when you put this thing together, that it's got nothing up there, that the whole cockpit nose section is separate. So you build all that and put it together, left and right half, and then you add it to the rest of the airframe. It's got these tabs and slots right here, and this back edge fits up against the fuselage right here. Now, the problem with that is, I don't know how else they could have done it, honestly. I don't know how else they could have engineered it. But there's a couple of issues that this creates. One is that you've got this joint that runs right along here, going straight forward from the edge of the leading edge extension, runs right up to about right there, and then goes over the top of the nose and wraps around and does the same thing on the other side. And that panel line right there by my fingernail is part of that joint. Now, overall, the fit there is not bad, but it's not the same on every copy of the kit. Some people have found that this joint right here is really small. Some people were more like mine, where it was like 0.5 millimeter, just way more than you'd want to have to deal with right there. So what I did to tighten it up was I very carefully removed material from this edge of this part of this subassembly right here, so that the whole thing would go a little further back and it would tighten up that joint in front of the windscreen. Now, the other thing that you have to do, though, is you have to relieve material on these either these slots or these tabs to allow that thing to slide all the way back. Once you do that, it's not bad. You still have to deal with it. You still get a joint there that has to be filled and smoothed over, but it is what it is. And I just handled it with my usual sprue goo where I needed to, which worked good because you have to engrave you have to redo the panel lines where it crosses right there, if you want it to look good. And then you know, and I had to re-engrave some of the panel lines that go around the windscreen, but you know, it all came out pretty good. I did end up with some ghost seams. This thing sat on the bench for about 3 months while I was working on the weapons and the gas tanks, and when I picked it back up, it had ghost seams right here on both sides that I had to deal with, but not too big of a deal. So that's that. The other place on the airframe that involves a little bit of work. One thing I want to point out is that makes this a little challenging is right here on this side where that joint runs. If you look at it, I think it probably shows it in the instruction sheet. There is okay, yeah, you can see it right here. So that detail right there, that little double diamond looking thing, that really shouldn't be there. That was on the Legacy Hornets, and it apparently is like the drain for the windscreen de-icing system. And the little diamonds are, you know, what you see real commonly on some features like that, where they put a radar absorbing material around it, because apparently that shows up less on a radar blip than a hole in the fuselage does. But point is that because those are sticking out of the side of the fuselage right there, they're about 1 millimeter away from where that joint runs, and if you're trying to preserve those details, it makes dealing with that joint really difficult. But the good news is you don't have to worry about it. You can do what I did and just slice them right off and sand and smooth it, because they're really not supposed to be there in the first place. Okay, so that's where you get some sort of bonus details. Now let's talk about a couple of places where where you get both bonus details and some missing details. And that starts right here around the tail, okay? The way that that this whole part of the fuselage with the intake trunks and everything mates to the upper part of the fuselage is that there's a joint that runs back along the fuselage right here where this panel line is. You can see that right there. It runs back and then goes up and then back right through the middle of that hole where the horizontal stabilizers plug in, and then all the way to the back of the fuselage. And it was a pretty good fit. Again, not a real, you know, crazy gap or anything, but it's at a minimum you're going to end up with what looks like a panel line that's not supposed to be there, and that's only if the fit is really tight. And mine was not quite tight enough to where I would have felt like I could get away with that even if that were legit. You can see where that runs right there, and that's the thing, there's not a panel line there. It's not supposed to be there. So again, if you want it to be right, you have to fill that in. Oh, and here's another one of those option things where they don't tell you why you should use one or the other of these environmental systems vents. The later version is this one, the one that I chose to use with the little pipes. I picked it because it was cooler looking. I didn't find out until later that it was the one that was on later Hornets. So that worked good in my favor. Anyway, the other thing is that there are some bonus panel lines there. There's a panel line that they've put in that runs from the back edge of the wing all the way to the tail, and it just shouldn't even be there. So again, if you want it to be right, you got to fill it in, smooth it over, and deal with it that way. Yeah, not a huge deal, but again, it's just a thing. I really liked that they gave you posable rudders, and the engineering on that was pretty good. So that's cool. Now let's talk about a place where they totally left off some detail that really baffles me, because I really think that they could have handled this easily in the molding, and that is right here. You can see that there's a triangular thing right there. That's because I scribed them, and it was not easy. Those are position lights, and there's one on each of those fairings, one on this side as well. And let's take a look at it in the instruction sheet. If I recall correctly, those are two pieces. Yep. That is part number A14 and A15. So it's, you know, I think they maybe they just forgot, or I don't know. I don't want to accuse them of being lazy, but yeah, it would have been easy for them to put that detail in part A15. You know, I guess the only excuse would be that if they did that, now these are handed. You've got to have one for the left side and one for the right side, and that means not only additional design work, but more molding costs because you got to have additional cavities. So yeah, it could have just been a cost-saving measure, but I feel like that's really kind of unforgivable because it's a very obvious feature when you see pictures of these aircraft from the bottom. Okay, another place where I do really feel like that they just, yeah, I'm sure it was a cost-saving measure, just really not cool, and that is right here, okay? The gun vent that's right in front of the landing gear bay. All right, this right here on a real Hornet, this whole thing is one big mesh vent. And because the joint for the left and right halves of the fuselage runs right through the middle of it, yeah, I mean, it's there. It just looks like a seam line running right through the middle of that really nicely molded detail. And I don't know, maybe the right thing to do would have been to just left it because at least that would have been straight. I attempted to punch a bunch of new holes, and yeah, you can see they look like shit. I'm really not happy about that. And it's super frustrating because that could have very easily been an insert. They could have had a notch in the fuselage halves right there with a piece that you put in either before or after joining the two fuselage halves that would give you a continuous vent detail across there. So yeah, whether that was just lazy or cost cutting or whatever, I don't care. That's just not cool. You know, especially on I mean, I think that this kit retails for like $80. I forget what I paid for it, but you know, for guys that are not too worried about that level of detail, yeah, that's fine. But yeah, for the rest of us, not cool, Ming, not cool. Now, another one that's kind of baffling that you'll have to deal with is right here on the on these flaperons. We got into a bit of a debate about those in SMCG one day. One guy who works on Hornets says, yep, absolutely, those are considered, well, out here they're considered ailerons because they move up and down. These really are just flaps because they only move down. Anyway, whatever. The point to this portion of the discussion is, if you look right there, B17 and B3, okay, that that joint between those two parts runs right across here, right smack dab in the middle of that nice flat surface that should be smooth in real life. There is no panel line there. There's nothing there that even begins to approximate that. And the bottom line is that they just had to do that as a molding consideration because the part would have been too thick if they'd made it as a solid piece. At least I suspect that was their reasoning. And so they just arbitrarily cut that chunk out of it. And yeah, you have to glue it back in. You got to fill it, sand it, etc. Otherwise, it just doesn't look good. So that's a bit of an annoyance. And I'm honestly not convinced that they could not have molded that entire thing as as one piece. I'm skeptical that they really had to cut it apart to keep from getting sink marks. So I think that pretty much covers everything with the airframe itself. Oh wait, one thing I did want to talk about is the intake trunks. They did a really good job with the intake trunks as far as the overall engineering goes. I mean, these are an issue on every modern fighter jet kit, is how do you get these intake trunks together and inside the fuselage without having a seam. And bottom line is you don't, because you're going to have a seam if you mold it in 2 halves, which is what they have to do. And, you know, but they did a pretty good job. The fit is good. I mean, there is a seam there, and you can see it. So if you care about it, you're going to have to figure out a way to deal with it. I wrestled with it a bit. Ultimately, just ended up doing a bunch of good old-fashioned filling and scraping and sanding with some sandpaper on the end of a stick to reach in there and take care of it. But, you know, they turned out okay. But what I wanted to point out is that the way that this is all engineered, it fits together pretty nicely, and there's not any real complaints. But here's the thing. The inside of the trunk is white. And the inside of the mouth of the intake, right here is light ghost gray, the same color as the rest of the lower fuselage. And so you've got a hard color separation. That's just a straight line between this edge right here of the trunk and the leading edge of the intake mouth. And you've got to figure out how to create that color separation, either by trying to mask inside it after you put the whole thing together, or you paint them separately and you put them together. And that's the thing that makes the most sense, and that's what most guys will choose to do. And that's not really a problem, except, okay, let me see if I can, I'm going to pull one of these chunks of paper towel out here so you can see this. So the deal is that when you put this outside portion of the intake onto the subassembly, the joint is right here, and then there's one in this corner as well. Okay, you can see that. The inside face is a separate piece that attaches to this whole subassembly, and then we come along and you glue this whole outer shell onto it. And so that joint I'm talking about is right here and right here. It's not terrible, okay, but not terrible was not good enough for yours truly. And I knew that I was going to want to be able to do a little bit of filling and chemical sanding inside that joint, inside that corner, to keep from being able to see that crack right there. And so what I wanted to be able to do was put some black super glue in there and smooth it off with debonder so that it wouldn't show. Well, obviously, you can't do that until this piece is attached to this piece. And the problem with that is that once you do that, if you go by the kit, well, you've already got the intakes in there, which means that you're going to be doing some sanding, priming, painting, whatever, right in here, and you got to figure out how not to allow that to affect the white on the insides of the intakes that are really hard to see in there. So, what to do? Because reaching in there with some masking tape, you know, not impossible, but not fun, because it is pretty far back in there. So what I did, typical, you know, engineer nerd kind of thing to do, is I figured out how I could put the outside shell of the intake, this piece, onto the center section of the fuselage without having the trunks in there first. And that required basically a lot of test fitting, a lot of grinding, a lot of cutting, but it really wasn't too bad. It basically just boiled down to having to remove material in the right spots to where this whole subassembly right here would slide in from the top and the back after this assembly step took place. And I got it done, and it really wasn't too bad. And I went through it in a little bit more detail in one of my random videos, but where it's a little bit easier to see than it is now with all this put together. The bottom line is you can do it. Does it, is it worth it? To me, it was, because I got a perfect color separation, and the fit is, still pretty good in there. You can see, it looks good. That's what I wanted. So I'm happy with that, but would it be worth it to everybody? Yeah, probably not, because it was a hassle, but that's the kind of problem solving that I love. So there's that. Now, since I'm talking about the intake mouth, I don't want to forget this. One thing that I did not like is that the leading edges of the intake mouth was basically just flat. The full thickness of this part. You can see it right here in the instructions. That right there, that highlighted edge, that's exactly what it looked like in the plastic, which is absolutely not what it looks like in real life. It actually does come down to a pretty sharp edge. And that's the other reason that I chose to do it the way that I did, was because I wanted to be able to work on those and sharpen them as I, before I primed and painted everything. And the only way to really be able to do that effectively was to be able to, to have it all together first. And now that I'm looking at it with that piece of paper towel out of there, you can see, oops, got a little bit of super glue in that corner right there. Gonna have to work on that. Anyway, that's that. I'm pretty sure that covers all of the stuff that I remember with this kit. Yeah, but I'll probably think of something later, and maybe I'll come back and add it, or maybe I won't. Oh wait, of course there's something that I forgot. Some of you guys were probably like, what is going on with the paint? Yeah, well, I'm sure some of you already know that this is the black basing technique in action. Basically what's going on here is that I've done a lot of random gray and white, varying levels of opacity, lightness and darkness, to create this kind of marbled texture that is going to bleed through, so to speak, when I go back over this with a very thin diluted layer of the final color coat. Well, not the final color coat, because I'll do a lot of post shading too, but this is just another way of doing pre-shading to help build more interest and tonal variation in the final thing. So you may say, well, what's going on with the nose cone, which is pretty dark and pretty opaque? Well, let's just see, because this is also a very important part of my process, and I'm over here digging around for a sanding sponge, because I like to help bring out some of this texture further on down the road by doing some very light sanding, and lacquers really lend themselves to this technique. So underneath this pretty opaque layer of paint, it looks a lot like this. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start doing some light sanding to reveal some of that. And I really like this technique because it is super controllable, super precise, and you can really kind of sneak up on things to get the effect that you want. So super fine grit sanding sponge, really soft, I'm going to try and keep this on camera while still also being able to look at this in my Optivisor. And we'll just see what starts to come out as I'm working that down. And this 2500 grit sponge is pretty worn out, and it may take a little bit before it starts to show up, but it's better to approach it slowly than to have to go back and fix it if you sand, if you sand too far. Although that's not really a big deal, and it also contributes to the sort of randomness and interest of the finish. Okay, but now you can probably start to see, maybe, if the light's good enough. Let me drag the light over here. Yeah, it's starting to show. Okay, so you're starting to be able to see some of that, and you're starting to see some really small, tiny little imperfections. Those are good. And again, if you don't like those, you can deal with some of that during post shading. So that's basically the technique there, and I'm going to continue to work on it, and you'll see the final result in part 2. Wait, what? You thought after suffering through 57 minutes of that monument to minutia that was going to be the end? Seriously, after 350 episodes on my channel, you'd think you'd know better. Because, yes, it has been about 10 days since I did the previous part of the video. And in that period of time, of course, I A, remembered something else, and B, had to change something that I sort of forgot to talk about. The thing that I forgot about was item A. The thing that I had to change that I did talk about was item B. So, item A, first of all, you will notice in the instructions for the little Hornet that you'll see this in your actual physical parts as well, but I can't show it to you for reasons that will become clear in a moment. You will notice, okay, right here, see that little triangular shaped thing? You'll see that appear in several places, including in the actual physical plastic. Now, it's pretty dramatic in the plastic, and what that is that's the clearance pocket for the fin of a Sparrow missile that's carried on the hip station. The problem is that it is barely, if at all, visible on the real aircraft. In fact, so barely visible that I was convinced it was not really supposed to be there at all, that it was just a molding concession, and so I spent no considerable amount of effort filling it in and making it truly disappear from the model. Which, given how invisible it is on the real thing, I don't really regret. But then, of course, after I did that, I saw some photos, or more specifically, was shown some photos that that prove that it is in fact there. It's just really shallow. So, yeah, I don't know. I feel like filled completely in is closer to reality than what Meng gave you in the plastic, because it is pretty dramatic. Okay, so that's the thing that I forgot about. Now, the thing that I had to change is right here, okay? So I know I talked about how there's a joint right here where this forward section joins with the rear part of the fuselage. And you will notice that that joint is now pretty much gone. The reason being because I thought there was actually supposed to be a panel line there, and so not only did I leave the joint, but I actually, at least for part of it, where it was a little too large to look like a panel line, I've worked hard to fill it and rescribe it and try and make it a bit sharper. Yeah, well, then somebody called me out and they were like, yeah, what about that seam right there? And I'm like, what are you talking about? That's not a seam. And they're like, well, yeah, there's really not supposed to be. And I was like, oh shit. Went and looked at my reference photos. And sure enough, for the most part, there is not a panel line right there in that area. It kind of is because you've got the edge of that door on both sides of the fuselage. So, yep. Went in, did the sanding, filling, sanding, refinishing, and actually I had already done all this paint at that point, so it was a complete refinishing process right there in that area. And then of course somebody showed me some pictures that, yep, again show that there is a joint in the skin right there, but it just barely shows. And it's one of those where there's actually several of them along here that just don't show very much. And I kind of feel like if you're going to put one of them in, you got to put them all in. And that's all a bunch of rescribing and re-riveting because it's just not within the scope of what Meng chose to give us in terms of surface details. So, is what it is. I'm fine with it. Also, same as I am with the depression on the hip station. And I think it looks okay. So yeah, you're also getting a sneak preview of the paint. This is where it's at this point. I've pretty much finished with all of the basic color on the belly of the thing, and because I just couldn't resist because it's so satisfying and so much fun, I actually started doing some washes in a few places, and you can see kind of where they are on some of these nicely molded little grates. So anyway, making progress. And yes, I promise, this is the end of this one. Okay, so there you go. Part one of what will be a two-part deal. The next part is going to be when I finish it, hopefully within the next few weeks, and we'll see how it all turns out. But as always, I appreciate you watching. Much love.